My 60 Years on the Plains, Chapter 6. We remained in this camp 3 days, and Williams was constantly on the lookout for Shoshones, or trappers, climbing up on high knolls and using a spyglass. On the morning of the 4th day, we moved down Little Wind River to where it forms a junction with Big Wind River, and saw no Indian signs. There is here one of the grandest and most romantic warm springs to be found on this continent. It is situated on the south side of the Little Wind River, about 9 miles from the mountains. Its mineral properties are unexcelled, and according to scientific men, it is the equal of any spring in what is now known as the National Park. The spring is on the Shoshone Reservation. I have been told that New York capitalists are willing to pay the government $1 million for it. The country from Owl Creek Range to the base of the Great Wind River Mountains is called Warm Land by the Indians. We stayed in this camp 2 days, keeping a sharp lookout, especially for war parties. Here I set my first traps for beaver and caught 2 and 1 foot out of 3 traps set, which made me feel very proud. In those days, beaver brought from $8 to $16 a hide. Dark otter skins brought a good horse from the Indians, or $10 to $12 from trappers. We next moved up the river about 20 miles, scouting the country towards Owl Creek Mountains, but saw no fresh Indian sign. Here was a beautiful and strong camp which could repel an attack from any number of Indians. Williams said we would have to remain here until we met the Shoshones, or ascertained if they had left for Green River by some other route. They avoided the plains as much as possible on account of the numerous war parties to be found there. On the 4th day at evening, a scouting party of Shoshones was discovered by Williams. I was with him, and we were some distance from camp. Williams said, "Shoshones." I asked him how he could tell, and he answered that it was by the way they acted, which he said denoted that they were the advance guard or scouts of a village. They always have scouts out when moving villages so as to be prepared for enemies. We galloped towards them, firing a shot. The Indians saw us and heard the shot and understood that we were friends. There were 9 in the party, and they were acquainted with Williams and seemed really glad to meet him. They asked him who I was and were told that I was a friend from the States. They accompanied us back to camp, where we had a feast and a smoke. Their curiosity was greatly excited on seeing our captured trinkets, and Williams recounted the whole circumstances of our trouble with the Blackfeet. They were the most excited Indians I have ever seen from that day to this. When shown the scalps, many of them yet stretched on hoops to dry, they jumped up and gave a ringing war whoop. These same Blackfeet had killed 2 trappers on Gray Bull Creek and had gotten away with 5 horses. Williams told the Shoshones that the Blackfeet who had attacked us had no horses. They answered that we had not seen all of them, and that they had stolen 7 horses from their village. According to the Shoshones' statement, the war party had split, and there must have been about 30 of them in all. The other Blackfeet were around, they said, and it made them uneasy. They wanted us to pack up at once and join their village. Washakie, one of the most remarkable Indians, was their chief, and he was a great friend of the whites. Williams told the Shoshones to return to their village, taking 2 of the Blackfeet scalps, and to notify Washakie that we were camped here and wanted to trade. They departed, saying that their village would be with us the next day. We scouted the country for quite a distance up the river, but saw nothing. It does not follow, because one sees no Indians, that none are about. It stood mountain men instead to be constantly on the alert, Indians or no Indians. Many a poor outfit has come to grief by not taking the mountaineers' advice. We were not disturbed during the night, and in the morning put everything in order to receive Washakie and his village. Williams told the men that they could have all the plunder captured from the Blackfeet and that the Shoshones would pay good prices for it. He told me that I could get a good horse for my 2 scalps. Dockett gave me a fancy scalp, saying, "Now, young chief, you can buy a squaw." About 3 o'clock, Washakie, with a bodyguard of 20 men, rode into camp. It was a pleasure to see that noted chief and Williams meet. Long-parted brothers could not have been more affectionate. We soon had a feast prepared, and after the feast a smoke. In the meantime, the village made its appearance, and lodges were put up above and below our camp. We were, in fact, corralled. The plunder was all spread on blankets, and as Indians are more acquisitive than whites, a lively trade sprung up, particularly with the women. They would give a pair of fancy moccasins for almost anything that had belonged to the Blackfeet. The chief's son brought a good horse and presented it to me. Anyone acquainted with the Indians knows that a present from them means that you own something that they want. I soon found out that it was the scalp he wanted, and I gave it to him. He was a noble young man with the characteristics of his father. The Shoshones were delighted at my proficiency in sign language, for by this time I was able to converse on any and all subjects. It must have been very amusing to hear the many questions the women asked me. What tribe had I been raised with? Where was my woman? Had I left her? They would not believe that this was my first experience. Trade continued until dark. The Indians exchanged moccasins, beaver hides, mink, marten, and buffalo robes. Williams bought all the furs and robes from our men, paying them cash. They had no interest in our stock of goods, but were paid to accompany us. Any furs which they caught in traps belonged to them. They were all old acquaintances of Williams and Perkins. The Indians stood guard that night, and in fact every night, while we were in this section. It stood them well in hand to do so. Kalispel Indians generally paid this country a visit every spring to take a few scalps and ponies. The Kalispels were enemies to all Indians on the plains. When they and Blackfeet war parties met, there was sure to be a clash, and this happened frequently. Williams and Perkins held council most all night, while scalp dances and war songs were being indulged in by all the young folks. It makes no difference with Indians whether they take the scalps or not, if only these had belonged to their enemies. I have heard people make statements to the contrary, but they knew not what they were speaking of. Hence, many false ideas originate in the minds of many well-informed Americans. The next day, Washakie gave orders to his people to bring their furs and robes and give a good trade to their friends. This they did to our satisfaction. 2 mounted parties were sent out scouting for enemies, and a few to bring in meat. One of the parties met 3 trappers who belonged to the outfit surprised by the Blackfeet. An account of the troubles of these men will well illustrate the risk taken by trappers in collecting furs in those early days and even 30 years later. The 2 trappers killed were off some distance from camp, looking after their traps, when Indians surprised and killed them. The other 3 heard the shots and hurried to camp to secure what horses they could, but the Indians were able to run off 5 head and also to capture the 2 rifles which we had retaken. Williams returned the rifles and knives to the 3 men. They were nervy, these 3. One was a Scotchman, one a Frenchman from St. Louis, and the third came from Kentucky. They said that when they heard the shots, they were aware that their companions had been attacked, so they rushed for their horses, securing 6, the Indians getting 3 besides the 2 belonging to their dead comrades. Kentuck said they had no opportunity to render assistance to their fellows as the Indians charged upon them. They were camped in a thick grove of cottonwoods and had prepared a breastwork for just such an attack. The Indians kept at long range, knowing that if they approached trappers' guns, some of them would come to grief. All Indians dreaded trappers when once brought to bay. Any tribe today will confirm this statement. A few shots were exchanged and then the Indians withdrew. Kentuck was anxious to find out what had been done with the 2 trappers, so he climbed a high knoll and saw about 30 Indians making for the mountains, half of them mounted. He then went down the gulch and found his 2 dead friends, scalped and otherwise mutilated in a horrible manner. His eyes flashed when recounting the circumstances. The reader can well understand the just cause for trappers retaliating. Good for evil is hardly a trapper's creed when dealing with Indians. After buying, the men they packed up and started to join the Shoshones, knowing where they were camped and intended to remain. After burying the men, they packed up and started to join the Shoshones, knowing where they were camped and intended to remain with them until they reached Green River. They now joined our party. In their possession were 6 packs of beaver of 80 pounds each, worth $9 a pound, making a total of $4,320. There was good money in trapping, but the rewards hardly justified the risks. I found the Scotchman and the Kentuckian well-educated men. The latter presented me with a copy of Shakespeare and an ancient and modern history which he had in his pack. We had an abundance of reading matter with us. Old mountain men were all great readers. It was always amusing to me to hear people from the East speak of old mountaineers as semi-barbarians, when as a general rule they were the peers of the Easterners in general knowledge. These 3 trappers had caught a beautiful white beaver, a fur which is very rare and valuable. This they presented to Williams and would take nothing in return, saying, "You keep this as a memento from us of the high esteem in which we hold you." In the afternoon, the other scouting party returned and reported that near Owl Creek Mountains they had had a fight with a war party of pinned Orillas, and that 2 of their number were slightly wounded. These 2 appeared very proud of their wounds. All Indians have that weakness, showing their wounds to all and looking for smiles from their lady loves for their bravery. End of chapter 6.